Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the K Touch. My name is Kay, where we have art and conversation. And I have a very interesting guest today. I have Wendy Leggett, who is a retirement coach. And I am quite intrigued to have this conversation with her today because prior to meeting and engaging with Wendy, I had no idea that there was such a thing as a retirement coach. This is me just coming into this conversation, really excited to know what this is about. So a lot of questions I'm going to be asking Wendy are going to be surrounding retirement, and I'm just really excited to have her here. Welcome, Wendy, to the K Touch. It's good to have you on my show.
Oh, I'm excited to be here as well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you. I'm just going to crack on, Wendy. Please tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us about who Wendy Leggett is and what's this whole idea of retirement coaching?
Hmm. It's interesting that you pose that question, who are you? It always leads us to that what do you do kind of thing. But what I
Yeah.
become more sensitized to is when people retire and they aren't their work any longer, how do you answer that question? Who
Yeah.
are you? What do you do? And so we'll get into that, but I'll
Hmm.
speak from the business that I do, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I am a retirement life coach, as you shared. I focus on the non-financial, really essentials to really making the very most of that next unique and exciting chapter in life when we've left career. Because oftentimes people think that's a do-it-yourself project. What could be so tough
Hmm.
about retirement, especially if you already have your financial house in order. But the
Yeah.
reality is, just like any important transition in life, we do bring our whole selves in. And so it goes beyond the finances, which is, of
True.
course, critically important. But those feelings of purpose, those feelings of connection, and a positive outlook on what's unfolding in life and our identity and the strengths
Hmm.
that we bring with us, all of those things are really, really important, and they're fundamental to having well-being and really thriving in retirement. And that's the work
Yeah.
that I do. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So you prepare people for that phase of retirement. I get that now.
Okay.
Because prior to actually engaging with you, I thought it was just going to be I get to that point and then I'm ready to retire, whatever that point is. But you've opened me to a world of possibilities that I never um, knew of. But tell us a bit more about those aspects that are non-financial. What
Yeah.
exactly does that mean? It being non-financial. What aspects are you referring to?
Yeah. Well, like we think about, for example, when you went from, let's say, school to a career,
Yeah.
you thought about, okay, what will be what's the contract, or what is going to be my salary, or what how
Yeah.
am I going to be remunerated? And that's certainly
Mm,
an important piece, the financial piece. But I'm going to guess that you also thought about, well, do I click with this company? Is their culture one that really aligns with my values? Do I
mm-hmm,
like the people there? What's the commute like? What are the snacks? If they have those kind of
mm-hmm.
perks at work.
Where's the
If
coffee?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Or if you're working remotely, are they pretty flexible about that, et
Mm,
cetera? And so same goes in different ways with retirement. That if we have the financial piece in order, but we don't think about those other piece parts that are important to us, that really
yeah.
connect with who we are and get us lit up and feeling like we matter, then it
Mm.
can start to feel like Groundhog's Day. So often people think, okay, about retirement as endless weekends and leisure and travel, and they'll golf all
That's
the
all I
time, or
thought
they'll
about it, to be
right,
honest.
or go on vacations all the time. And the thing is that tends to be one of those bucket list items that once it's checked off, then it starts to feel like same old, same old. I remember when I was in college, I had a girlfriend that worked at Baskin Robbins. I don't know if you're acquainted. It's a 31
No, no.
flavor ice cream place. And
Yeah.
she could have all the ice cream that she wanted. And after a time, she got really tired and didn't want any more ice cream. And it's
Yeah.
kind of the same with the endless weekends leisure travel. After a bit, the bloom is off that rose, and you start to feel like, wow, what else is there for me? And so
Mm,
we know that we're social creatures. We know that
yeah.
we need to feel like we matter and that there's a meaning and purpose behind our days. And if we don't have some of that really mapped out and built into
Mm,
our life, then we can start to feel like one client of mine said, lost in the desert, or another felt like, you know what, I didn't know that this was all that it was going to be in retirement. It's not cracked up to what I thought it would be. And that's when we start to see people going back to work, even though there's so much
oh,
more.
right.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's for financial reasons, but so often it's because they just aren't feeling engaged. They're not feeling connected with possibilities or seeing, what else they can contribute in the world, they start to see that their world maybe begins to narrow, because we know as we age, if we don't continue to expand and grow, then our lives are going to potentially constrict. There's going to be loss, or there's going to be
Mm,
less opportunities in some areas.
mm,
So all of those things from a mindset standpoint are very important. From a physical standpoint, really recognizing that we're not one day in, the next day you're out, one day not exercising, and the next day everybody says, oh, and I'll get healthy when, or I'll get to the gym when I retire. Really
yeah.
trying to have that runway to retirement and mapping out ahead of time, what are some of those things that you can do small steps at a time to build those habits that will be so important
Okay.
to you in your future.
That's amazing. Actually, I hadn't actually thought about it that way. Yes, you will get tired if you think about it. It's like you've been in this cycle of constantly going to work or going to some form of engagement for a large chunk of your life. You look forward to its end in quotes, so you can do the other things that you've always wanted to do, like the ice cream truck, but like the ice cream truck. Yeah, but after a while you can only have so many flavors of ice cream and you're like, well, is this all that there is to it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, all right. Now I'm going to be asking you a few questions, because when you came up, honestly, you just opened up a world of possibilities, or a world of questions, by just when we had that initial conversation about retirement. So
Yeah.
please be patient with me. This is just how my mind works with some of these things. First question I want to ask regarding retirement is, what do you think about the day and age that we are in now, where people are living longer and having much more healthier lives? Do you, in your profession and your engagement with such people, see more of a trend towards retirement, or people wanting to stay more engaged with work and more in their vocations? What do you think about that?
I think that's a really relevant question. And I want to
Mm,
just say that I so appreciate any and every question you ask me, because, as you mentioned, this is a whole new topic for you. And
yeah.
you're supporting your listeners by asking the
Mm,
questions that they're probably wondering too. And I think,
yes.
too, it's obvious you're not of the quote unquote traditional retirement age. And
No.
probably a lot of your listeners may or may not be either.
Oh, I'm going to come to that at some point. The age
Okay.
for retirement. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, if I can plant those seeds of a runway to retirement, or a runway to elderhood, if we want to call it that, and also
Mm,
taking those small steps to really envelop a life that has more balance and that does
mm,
look at to all of these different aspects, finding meaning, feeling purposeful, feeling connected, staying
yeah.
connected, having a pro-aging mindset. All of those
Mm,
things at any age or life stage will be important for people.
yeah.
But then rolling it back to your question about, what is it about retiring? Is it still, what I'm hearing is kind of, is it still relevant? Is it still a
Yeah.
topical issue? In my demographic, because I'm of that retirement age, it is,
Yeah.
because the tradition of retirement still is part of the vocabulary.
Okay.
But I feel, even though as a retirement life coach, that word retire needs to be retired. It came about in the 30s. In the
Yeah.
in the U.S., it was around Social Security, when people had been working in the fields and working in the factory, and they got to a point where they were tired. And yet, if they
Mm,
were to stop working, there wouldn't be support for them. How would they
yeah.
survive? So the
Yeah.
government stepped in with Social Security, and they were able then to bridge that gap. But when we look back at studies, people generally expired after a couple of years. They didn't live too
Mm.
much longer after they left work. And
Oh,
a lot
wow.
of factors come into play for that, but
Mm-hmm.
part of
Mm-hmm.
it is, and what we see now too, is that when people do retire and they don't have any interest or vision of what's possible, or feel motivated and positive about it, they too can start
Oh.
to decline, and they too
Mm.
can start to cut that life short that you were talking about, where we do have now this expanded lifespan. But along with
Mm.
it, Kay, we do want to have that health span as well. And part of good health is having a good mental and emotional outlook on things. So for
Yeah.
the demographic, the Gen X's and the baby boomer
Mm.
generations that are of that quote unquote typical retirement age, the
Yeah.
message that I bring forward is a critical one. I've seen way too many people feel as though, oh, this is what I should be doing in retirement. And then they start to really find that the days are long and not inspiring, or they feel like they don't contribute any longer. I had one client say she felt invisible. We don't want
Oh,
that for
wow.
anyone. There's so much
Mm.
that at whatever age we're at, we can contribute. And so
Mm.
So for those that are in that typical age range, currently like in the 50s and 60s and beyond,
Yeah.
that's the typical ages for retiring. But I think for your generations,
Mm,
it will look different and it will be highly individualized, and people won't be thinking about it so much as one day you're working, the next day you're out. There will be
yeah.
more of a hybrid approach. I know I
Mm,
have three sons that are all in their early 30s, and they
yeah.
look at life in a very different way, their working life in a very different way than I ever did. And so I
Mm,
think that there are those experiences and that balance, that's baked in more in later generations than there were in
yeah.
mine. Yeah.
Mm.
Does that kind
You,
of
you,
make
yeah,
sense?
you've said a few things, and I'm going to, you forgive me, I'm going to have to start picking some of them. But yeah, that was a very nice summary about it. Um, So I'm just going to start with this. Do you think that there is any such thing as a set age to retire? So I know, in the with some generations, and depending on what generation you could fall in, that concept could take on a whole different meaning. But can you objectively say that this is a range of an age to start, slowing down and settling into, in quote, retirement?
Hmm. I don't personally think that, because I think that idea of slowing down, I think
Mm,
it has to be contextual. So,
yeah.
slowing down, like maybe things from a physical standpoint, the things you could do in your 20s look very
Mm,
different when you're in your 50s or 60s or beyond. But then again, maybe not. And I think sometimes we buy into a set point that's there from society. Society
yeah.
saying, when you get to be this age, you can't do this any longer. And if we buy
Mm,
into that, our mind is going to impact our bodies. And sure
yeah.
enough, we may not be able to. That doesn't mean
Yeah.
that we're not looking at things realistically, that
Mm,
everybody individually is going to reach certain points in their lives where they maybe, like you said, need to slow down because they have
mm,
certain reasons. But let's not make those assumptions based on something arbitrary around age.
yeah. Yeah.
That's my feeling. So for some, there's this big movement afoot. Well, it's kind of come in and out, called FIRE, financially independent, retire early, where people in
Okay.
their 20s and 30s
Yeah.
aspire to quote unquote retire. But the
Mm,
thing is, when you really look at what they're doing, no, they're not maybe in a traditional career any longer, but most of them are doing entrepreneurial things. Most of them are
yeah.
still contributing in other ways. So do we define that as retired?
Correct.
But
Yeah.
I think so often people, want to put up that trophy and say, I retired.
Yes.
And I think that it can carry that kind of connotation. But I think as we move forward, I think it'll be less and less, and there'll be a tarnish maybe on that trophy. So to get back to your
Mm,
initial question, no, I don't think there's a certain age. I had done a presentation and a gentleman afterwards came up and said, I love what you're talking about, and I definitely will contact you when I retire. But I own my company right now and I'm not ready. And he said, and I'm 92.
amazing. I don't know if I want to be in that position, but I get where he's coming from.
But he was happy. And so to answer your question, no, I believe strongly it's an individual thing. I don't advocate to retire. But what I
Yeah.
do advocate is that if you've chosen to do that, then let's retire well. Let's go
Oh,
in
wow.
with our awareness and intention and
Mm.
motivation to be all that we can be in that next chapter.
I like
That's
that word, intention. It has to be intentional. Not, and I think I've that's the vibe I keep getting from a lot of the interviews that I've seen you on. It has to be planned, because a lot of people tend to stumble into it, or have only at the back of their mind just the financial preparation. So I do understand where you're coming from when you say that. But
yeah.
how do you address the psychological impact of losing identity and status after retirement? Because I can imagine a few people on that journey to retirement see and associate themselves with one particular identity. And
Yeah.
because, as a result of maybe for reasons, maybe health reasons or whatever, they can no longer carry out that same responsibility and have to step back, have to cut off from that. I can imagine the psychological impact that has. So,
Yes.
as a retirement coach, how do you come in?
Yeah, well, because you've listened to me, you probably heard me say this, that there's a saying, if you are what you do, who are you when you don't? And
Yeah.
that idea that so often our careers are so interwoven with our sense of identity and who we
Mm,
think that we are. and how society looks at us. That question going back to the beginning of our talk, what do you do? And so
Mm.
it's important then to really separate out the difference between roles and our identity, because
Yeah.
roles are the external, but internally, who we are and who we've always been, and the
Mm.
strengths and passions and capabilities, that doesn't go away when we retire. That's
Good
still
point.
there.
Yeah.
But if we don't bring it to the fore, and if we don't really recognize all those gifts that we have, and at the
Mm.
same time determine, okay, from career, what don't I want to bring with me into retirement? What are all the things I want to bring with me? Make a conscious
Oh.
decision. But what
Mm-hmm.
are the things, the habits and
I.
patterns that don't
Yeah.
serve? And leave
Yeah.
those behind. And so I think that that's a critical piece. Well, I don't think that's a critical piece that I really delve into with my clients, is
Mm.
this piece around identity and really separating out the role from who you are.
Yeah.
Because as we go through life, our roles are going to constantly change. But the transformation and the transition is what happens inside. And how do we have an ending to that one career or role, and how do we then move into the new beginning, and what feelings are coming up that we need to address? So
Mm.
that's the kind of path that I take my clients on.
Okay. Yeah. That's an interesting one. So you mentioned something about people stepping into retirement, and because they lose a sense of purpose and identity, or can't, or not, is it that they lose it, or there's just a dissociation, they start to decline from that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, guide us through the steps on how that can be reversed, if possible, maybe from your own experience?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it is important that we step back and say, okay, I'm moving into retirement. How do I define that?
Mm.
What is my vision for this next chapter? And not based on what society tells us. Again, is it that idealistic view that it's endless weekends, leisure travel, or is it the pessimistic view
Mm.
that it's aging and loss and one foot into the grave? But instead, coming
Mm.
to the middle. It's not an either or, but having that realistic optimism. So really
Mm.
saying, okay, realistically, where am I at? Physically, emotionally, mentally, where am I at? And what do I want for myself? What do I envision for myself? And so that's
Yeah.
kind of the starting point. And from
Okay.
there, then we see, okay, what do you value most? Because we
Mm.
know that when our values are aligned with our actions, then we stay more
Yeah.
motivated and connected. So
Yep.
that's an important piece. And then also this topic that you bring up around purpose.
Mm.
Purpose, we hear so often, oh, you have to find purpose, or you need to have purpose in your work. Well, we feeling purposeful is the key. So
Mm.
instead of looking at it
Yep.
as a noun, a thing, instead let's look at it as an action, and how can we feel purposeful? And if we feel purposeful each day, even if it's around reading a book because it expands our thinking, or helping a
Yeah.
neighbor, or purpose with a capital P, starting a nonprofit, or starting a business, or taking care of grandkids full time. But
Yeah.
but being, again, very intentional about those things, because when we make those decisions, then we can really feel more connected with ourselves and more contributory to others. But
Yeah.
when we overlook it and we just get into what I call that busyness factor, which so often people do when they retire, they have their to-do list and they have their bucket list and they
Mm.
check, check, check
Mm.
things off. I had one client come to me and say, my dance card is way fuller than it ever was at work. I'm exhausted and I might as well
Yeah.
go back to work because I'm more stressed out now. And at least I was making money then. And so it was a matter of me deconstructing with her and saying, let's look at how your days are filled. And she looked at that calendar
Yep.
and recognized there were a lot of things on there that she had said yes to, but they didn't really connect with what was important to her or gratifying to her. And so
Yeah.
that's an important one too, is that people do so often get so excited about retirement or so excited about not working that oftentimes they either fall out or they jump right into making commitments and getting busy with activities, and they overlook that piece that really
Mm.
says, how am I changing inside? My role on the outside changed, but what's coming up for me around my feelings about it, and what maybe is getting me a little confused or overwhelmed or feeling disconnected, and what might
Mm.
help me to not,
Yeah.
to be able
Feel
to
that way.
navigate that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then what about so you have a few people. I was just thinking about, also still on the whole mindset of retirement, and some people's disappointments. So when have you ever encountered people leave and start off this journey of retirement? They now feel disappointed with what, you know, how the whole concept of the grass is green, greener on the other side. So they finally
Yes.
arrive at that grass and then say, "Is this all that it has? Is this all that it has to offer?" Um,
Yes.
with such individuals, what do you think is the way forward? Is it a case of just embracing that, or having a total? So let's your initial idea for retirement was wrong. Let's just shift that mindset to something else. What's that like?
Yeah, I think it's important to dig a little bit deeper. So if the person is saying, "Well, this isn't what it was cracked up to be," then it's
Hmm,
really exploring and saying, "Well, what did you think it was going to be?" And so
hmm,
then the person says it, and it's like, "So what is it about that that was so appealing to you, or what really pulled at your heartstrings about that, or why do you feel connected to that vision? What
yeah,
was it?" And then what's getting in the way of you being able to move in that direction? So when we really take it apart and we look at, what is it that you want, where did that want come from, what
hmm,
are your beliefs around that, how are you connected to it, what's getting in the way, then we can start to find the pathway. But I think so often people don't have that roadmap or that pathway.
hmm,
So like you said, they have certain expectations, and then all of a sudden, whoa, this didn't live up to my expectations, so
yeah,
now I want to bail. And instead, we want to meet everyone where they are and
well,
then
yeah,
understand, because so often I think too, people buy into what society says you should be
mm,
doing in retirement or how you should be feeling in retirement. And when it doesn't connect in that same way, then there are these expectations that are really diminished. I had one client who, when we started working, she was despondent about retiring. Her husband had retired 8 years before she did, and each
yeah,
year she promised him she would retire, but she loved her work. But she
mm,
got to the point where she felt very strongly, I have to retire. There's traveling we want to do. I know that my husband being older, this won't always be an opportunity. I owe it to our relationship. There's passion projects we want to do. But all
yeah,
of that aside, she said, I feel like a part of me is dying inside. She was
yeah,
really, really feeling that so deeply. And the first thing I said to her, and what I'd say to the person with the grass is greener on the other side,
yeah,
is that that's totally normal. This is a new, unique experience. You've worked for so many years. You've never been given this open book in a way, but yet it's not an open book. It's a new chapter in your life. You're bringing so
yeah,
much with you. This and so build upon those strengths, build upon those capabilities. And that's what I did with that client too. But first and foremost, normalize for her to say 1 in 3 struggle in retirement. That's the dirty little secret that everybody thinks, oh, it's so easy. No, life
mm,
goes on and life has its ups and downs in retirement, just like any stage of life. And
yeah.
so really understanding there's nothing wrong with you. You didn't miss a day in school learning about what the perfect retirement would be. But let's start to really define what's getting in the way, what's important to you, and how can we move in the direction.
Okay. Now, a few thoughts about critics of the whole retirement coaching. Please respond to what a few of these statements. Tell me what you think about people saying things like retirement coaching is a luxury that only the privileged can afford. What do
Mm.
you think about that?
Well, I think that's generally focused on financial, because there's retirement coaching for finances,
Okay.
because retirement life coaching isn't that kind of expenditure. I mean, and I work with people for one session or for 8 sessions or for, meet with them monthly. It's really
Mm,
individualized. And so
okay.
I understand what that point is. But the thing is, if it wasn't working one-on-one with me or in group or couples, there are so many resources out there too. So what I would share is that it doesn't have to be working with a coach.
Mm,
You can certainly find those resources. There are a lot of books, there are videos you can watch. But what I'm passionate about is that people move into this next chapter feeling supported, feeling seen, and really
yeah.
being able to continue to contribute and bring their gifts. So I'm
Yeah.
not for everyone, and I totally get that. But for those
Mm.
that want that thought partner and somebody to walk with them and help map that out, then that's something that I can provide too.
Can you can you share a bit about the approach you take? So I know you've said a lot. We've touched on different things, but take us through the stages themselves. So, if I were to approach you and ask for your services to consult with you, what does
Yeah.
that mean? What am I to expect from this?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So, the first thing would be to have a discovery call, and so
Mm,
that's complimentary, and it's really a coaching session. So, I'd be asking you some of the things we've talked about today. What's your vision, and what are you hoping for, and what are you concerned about, and
mm,
what do you see might get in the way of you moving in that direction, or maybe you don't have a clarity around the direction, and so what could help you with that? So
mm,
it really starts out with that, and then through that conversation, if someone feels as though I could be that guide for them, then I'd
mm,
really determine with them, what those piece parts would look like. So I do
mm.
have what I call a signature package, Retirement Beyond Expectations, and it's
Yeah, I've
eight
heard you
eight.
talk about
Yeah,
that as well.
yeah, and so it's 8 sessions, and included with that, if someone wants, is work around mental fitness. Changing that mindset that you touched upon, so that we are looking at it as that half full instead of half empty vantage
Mm-hmm.
point. Um, and then it can be anywhere from, like I said, one session. I haven't really had that with people, but I'm happy to offer that,
Mm,
to, however many sessions. And then for some of my clients, then we meet monthly after that time, some quarterly, and some are completed after after we finished our initial engagement. So
yeah.
it really is very individualized. But I think that the 8 sessions, the reason I designed it that way is it does cover a lot of important areas: the power of being able to harness the power of transitions, being able
Mm,
to really bring forward what are your values, what feels purposeful to you, these aspects around your identity, achieving more balance, looking at the
mm,
physical aspects, what kind of legacy of wisdom you want to leave, and what that roadmap can continue to look like for you, so that it's sustainable on your own. It's not a matter of
mm.
needing me in your back pocket for the rest of your retirement.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you directly with regards to, I know you've clearly separated financial retirement coaching with the lifestyle retirement coaching. I know with the financial retirement coaching, there'd be some kind of calculation with regards to whether or not an individual is financially prepared for retirement. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you've had to tell someone, I think it's time that you consider changing or slowing down or something else, or told someone, you know what, I don't think this is right for you. I think you still need to give. I want to know what kind of advice people are expecting. Would they expect you to say, I think it's time, or don't do it yet. You still have a lot to give in that particular area.
So far as with like when people are deciding if they're going to retire or
Yes
not.
or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't come up too often for me, just because it is the non-financial, the psychological, social side of it. So
Mm,
when we start talking, they really are at that point where they're deciding to retire.
okay.
But I
Okay.
have had, I mean, to your point though, I've had clients, not too often, where we start to work and it becomes very clear to me that they aren't really ready to retire, and they're very
Okay.
happy working. And so we really delve into that. And generally, it's because they think they're of a certain age that they should be retiring, or
Mm,
people are giving them so much pressure to retire. But then we're
yes.
able to really delve into, when, how do you achieve balance so that you're able to spend time with people, but at the same time continue on your course around career? Because as I
Yeah.
shared, I don't advocate to retire. I
Yep.
advocate that if you choose to retire well. And then I work with a lot of financial advisors. So I blend out their practice, so far
Mm,
as they work from the financial standpoint. And then as they see that clients are struggling, then they refer them to me and I work with them. And I've had some clients who can't afford to retire. Their financial advisor has said to them that they can't. One situation comes to mind where my client was very angry, really, that his financial advisor said he couldn't afford to retire because he was
oh.
71, and he said, I should have retired at 65. I couldn't afford
Mm,
to then, and I can't afford to now, but when do I get my time? And so
mm,
through the course of coaching, what we were really able to start to focus on is what he had in his life. He was looking at it from that vantage point of scarcity rather than abundance, and
yeah.
feeling like I don't have any choices. And when I
Mm,
walked through with him, and I won't take too much time here, but walked through with him, he owned a beautiful home. He could choose to sell it, if the finances would be less in that way. He had some really intricate hobbies that were expensive. He could give up those hobbies,
mm,
but he didn't
mm,
want to.
mm.
And so when he started to see that he was that choice and he had agency, that he was choosing to spend money in
Yeah,
those ways,
yeah,
that
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
kept him from being able to retire
Mm,
financially more sound. Then he
yeah.
built a gratitude practice. That's what we really focused on, is shifting that
Mm.
mindset to what you have rather than what you don't have.
What you don't,
And
yeah, yeah.
that was really just, I mean, the light bulb went on for him. It just made such a huge difference, because then he was really a lot more present and a lot more thankful for the things that he had in his life, that he had chosen to have in his life.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's encouraging when you hear things like this and the stories. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's just making me to think maybe it's about time I get a retirement coach as well. But um, do people really know, from your experience, do people really know what they want from retirement? Um, how prepared are people? I mean, you've said there are certain people that all they simply focused on is the financial. But have you encountered people who seem to understand that there's a transition that's needed? And what's the experience with working with such people?
Yeah, well, the majority of my clients are ones who want more, who want
Okay.
answers, who want to have a pathway, or they're in that pain point where they've already retired. I just onboarded one client recently, so it comes to mind, where
Mm,
he has been retired for 10 years, but started to feel like he just wasn't there. There just wasn't that oomph any longer. He was feeling really like he was starting to decline, and
to
so
decline, yeah.
yeah, so I think it is really an individual thing, but when clients are open to what's possible or willing to be vulnerable about the things that are weighing heavy on them, or that they want
Mm,
more in life, then that's when I can really be of most service, because
mm,
there are a lot of people that feel like, hey, what's this isn't so difficult. I can do it on my own. And that's the same with anything in life, right? That, people choose to have a financial advisor, choose to have a travel agent, or
yeah,
choose to
yeah.
have an expert in their field, or they don't and they do it alone. But I do speak at a lot of different conferences and for groups. And so often we'll have people come up afterwards and say, wow, I wish I'd met you before I retired, because I wouldn't have gone through so much struggle. And
Hmm.
then I think oftentimes people just become resigned or resolved that, oh, well, this is all that there is for me for
That
the
there
rest of
is,
my
yeah,
life.
yeah, yeah.
And that's why I'm
And
so
like you said,
passionate
that's
about what
where
I
for
do.
some of them the
Yeah.
decline starts actually.
Yeah. But no judgment here. We meet people where they are and whatever
Mm,
works for people. But for those that I can be of support, then knowing that I'm here and available, I think is what's key. So,
mm, mm. Okay. How do you avoid, now this is something I had to consider, projecting your own view? So here we have, you are supposed to be assisting an individual, and obviously you're a professional. I'm just looking at it. If I were a retirement coach, how do I avoid projecting my own ideas or my own views concerning retirement onto someone else, onto the client?
yes. Well, I am a professional certified coach, so I have
Mm,
extensive training in coaching. And what coaching is
mm,
about is not giving advice, not being a therapist, not being a
mm.
consultant, not being an advisor, but really being a thought partner and listening, because the belief is that we all have the answers within, and we
Okay.
are capable of finding those answers, but sometimes they get buried. And so
Yeah.
having a guide to help with that. But so I follow the ethics of the International Coaching Federation, under whom I'm accredited, and so I
Mm,
feel very confident that I don't do that, because
mm.
that would not be in service of my clients. That would be in
No.
service of myself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
True.
great,
True.
great question. So
Hope I didn't throw you off there. It's just
no,
random
I
thoughts
love
that
it.
come in
Yeah,
sometimes.
no, I bring whatever. I mean, I think it's important, because I know for myself, my background was in corporate sales leadership. So I was
Yeah.
working for Fortune 50 to fashion to franchises for the bulk of my career. And when I made the shift into going back to school and becoming a professional certified coach, I
Yeah.
really hadn't worked with coaches before. I'd worked with consultants, I'd had mentors, but I didn't really know that much about coaching. And so the
Mm.
questions you're asking are ones that I'm sure your listeners are asking too,
Well, that's
especially
as
if they
well.
haven't worked with a coach. So,
Yeah. Okay. So another thing that now caught me was this concept of burnout. Can you explain what do you think Because some people might guys or misunderstand burnout from the tipping point to retirement. So think that they are ready for retirement when in actual fact they're just exhausted. How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one, right? Because I mean, that has to be that's a separate issue, although one that I definitely deal with,
Yeah.
because when when we start to see those signs of burnout, then ideally we stop and say, "Gosh, have I been saying yes to things that I
Mm.
should have been saying no to?"
No, too. Yeah.
Because sometimes when we say yes to things, then we're saying no to ourselves, and we
Mm.
know that if we aren't don't have that strength and that self care, then it's
Mm.
very difficult for us to then be able to bring that into the world in a
Yep.
contributory way. And so oftentimes that's where burnout happens, but it's tough. It's hard to exert those boundaries. It's hard to, have hard stops around things. It's hard to sometimes be able to communicate that this is too much. So,
Mm.
and because that tends to be what burnout is about, is when it's just too much,
Mm.
either physically or mentally or emotionally or a combination. And so ideally we don't ever get to that point. We take
Okay.
those mental health days, or we make sure that we're having some communication around boundaries, or we are making sure that when we say yes, that we're really intentional about that yes, and we're not
Mm.
just falling into what we should be doing.
Yeah.
And so all of those piece parts. But yes, if we in the beautiful world, people don't go into retirement in that burned out
Yeah.
situation. But I definitely have had clients that have. And what I really recommend is, just like when people, there's that idea from high school to college that you can take a gap year so that you
Mm.
have that time to kind of decompress and reset
Mm.
and look at things, shift into a really open, positive mindset. I recommend that then for people who are burnt out, that feeling is to have a gap period, to give it a pause, get a ponder, have a little bit of time. And so
Mm.
rather than jumping right into things, because again,
Yeah.
so often people do, but I really recommend that if that's what someone does and they have this gap period, that they do use it as a time for reflection, not just for falling out, but really starting to ask those questions. What do I want for myself in this next chapter? What's important to me? What feels meaningful to me? What gifts do I want to continue to bring into the world? And
Mm.
so utilizing that time to not just get restored, but also reset for the next chapter.
Yeah. Refreshed. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so can you share with us a few misconceptions about retirement? You've engaged with people. I know you're a speaker. You've spoken in a lot of meetings, and I reckon that from those people have engaged with you and you've had to correct a few misconceptions. You've said one, for instance, that it's not necessarily a decline. It doesn't have to lead to it doesn't mean a lack of purpose. So what other misconceptions are associated with retirement that you can share with us?
I think oftentimes people think that it is made up of to-do lists and bucket lists. And so
Yeah.
that all those activities and just staying busy, busy, busy. And so that's a misconception, because just like the ice cream, at some
Mm.
point that busyness starts to feel pretty empty, or it starts to feel like same old, same old. And we
Yeah.
want to feel like we matter. We want to feel connected. We want to feel like there's a reason for us to get up in the morning. And the
Yep.
to-do list and bucket list isn't going to generally check
That's
that
it.
off for
No,
us.
it's not
Yeah.
sufficient. No,
Right.
no, it's
So
not.
that's an important one. I think too that it's not a misconception, but a reality is that on average, a retiree watches 47 hours of TV a week. And
Oh, wow.
so the misconception then is that we, fill our days then as we did, we basically have a full-time job watching TV and living someone else's life that we're seeing on
Yeah.
the screen. And
Mm.
so if we don't take charge, life will take charge for us. If we don't take that agency and make those choices, they will be made for us. So I talk about being the CEO of you. And I think that that's where sometimes people think, oh, I now it's freedom and no structure and things, but we operate better when we have some sort of plan. Each of us,
Yeah.
what that plan looks like is different in that amount of structure, but otherwise we can just feel like we're very aimless, and it's almost like you get in a
Mm.
car and you're going to go somewhere, but you
But
don't.
you don't know where you're going. Yeah.
Right. Then you're just going to be, maybe you'll come up to something wonderful, but then again,
Mm.
more than likely you'll use up a lot of gas and you'll use up a lot of time and a lot of frustration and not get where you possibly could.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that that's an important one too.
Mm,
And this
mm,
idea that it should just be all about freedom, that's a misconception because, again, when you have this vast open area and you don't really know what to do with it, that can start to be concerning to people. We need to have some kind of guardrails or some
yeah.
kind of, expectation about what's coming next. So
Mm.
those are some of the
Oh,
things.
yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with those. Yeah, that you've cleared up a few things. Fear of judgment, aging, and irrelevance.
Mm.
Um, I think that in itself is something that a few people are haunted by, and that actually is the reason why some people might not want to retire, not want to slow down, because they don't want to get to they don't want to ever imagine what it might mean. And it's not a reality, but in their minds, it might translate to irrelevance.
Mm.
And so I wonder if, in a way, that yeah, that is something that definitely keeps people from taking that plunge. And I assume that you're part of what you do is you guide them through that so that it doesn't become something that haunts them.
Yes, you're so right because the relevance that we find in career, if we break that down and look at, well, what constituted that relevance and what
Yeah.
strengths and capabilities and interests can we bring with us into retirement? So again, it's not starting over. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from strength, and you really reflect on the things that make up who you are, and then how
Mm,
do you translate that into a non-career next chapter? And so
yeah.
I think that's where being a retirement life coach and having that opportunity to open people's minds up to what really does exist within, but maybe over time it's just gotten buried. So we do look at, when you were younger, what let you up? Or if nobody was watching, what would you do? Or if it
Mm,
really the outcome didn't matter, what would you put a toe into? And so really just starting to open up that imagination, allowing ourselves to recognize that a beginner's mindset is about growth and that
yeah.
failure is really learning. So we don't need to be looking at quote unquote failure, but just really shifting out of that return on investment key performance indicator mindset that we
Mm.
had in business and look at other factors that are meaningful for us in retirement.
Yeah. I honestly, I like I said before, coming to this conversation, I had my mindset on the traditional way of retirement, the one that I was introduced to. You get to a certain age and you just stop it all. But this has given a fresh perspective on things. So before
I'm
you're
glad.
going to give a final word at some point, but before then, I just wanted to ask how people can get across to you and get your services.
Oh, I appreciate that opportunity. Well, you mentioned the name of my company, which is Conflux Retirement Coaching, Conflux. They can go to my website and there are opportunities there to connect with me or
Mm,
request a complimentary coaching call, like I talked about. So that's the
yeah.
easiest. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook as well. So,
Mm, okay. Well, thank you so much for that. Now, as the usual, before you give a final word, this is an art channel. And I was whilst you whilst you were speaking, I was looking at a notebook. I wasn't ignoring you. I was listening to all you were saying.
great.
But I was trying to make a sketch. And you've got really nice features. So I was trying to capture all of that within this conversation. That's the challenge of this art channel. And so I've got something. It's not finished, but it is partly done. And I was just going to show it to you and then explain where I was going with this art. So so, Wendy, while you were speaking,
Drum, drum roll,
drum roll
please.
there. I need to bring that effect out. But this is the art I was able to make. Now,
Oh,
this is you. But there's something I'm going with this. I'm going to put there's a cap that's going to be here, and I want you to be wearing a jersey. And that's a life coach jersey because I feel that you're guiding people at a very essential part in their lives. And I didn't know, like I said, prior to meeting you, I didn't know how important your role is. And then I was just thinking about it, and I said the only way I could come close to describing you is like a baseball coach. And you're the kind of person who needs to give someone a kick in the rear behind and say, you know what, it's not time. You still have a lot to give, so go back on that field and give all that you've got to give. And that's what I have in my
I
mind. So I'm
love
going to
that.
finish this.
I love
Yes.
that. Yeah, that's awesome. And I so appreciate how you're able to synthesize and come up with that vision and see, what goes along with the just the person, what connection you saw. So I so love that. And thank you so much. A lot of great energy around that, and that definitely connects. So thanks.
Yes. So Wendy, please give us a final word. We've come to the end of this interview. Can you share something with the audience as a final word, or anyone who is at that stage considering a change in their station?
Well, I don't know if I can top what you said about, being that coach, and yeah, but I'll try. Uh, I think the takeaway that I'd say is that really at any age or life stage, we can start to really build into our lives these small steps to moving into really taking that agency and being that CEO of you. And so
Mm,
that's what I'd like to really impart is that if we don't make the decisions, life will make them for us. I talk about creating a retirement by design, not default. And that's
mm.
what I'd really want to impart.
Oh, thank you so much, Wendy. That's for those words of inspiration and wisdom. And there you have it, audience. This is Wendy Leggett, retirement coach, telling us all about the journey and the support that a coach would bring towards that transition and how important it is. Thank you, Wendy, for such an amazing time. And I can't wait to send you this art piece, which is what I usually do. Anyone who's on my show, for bringing this value to my show and to my audience. This is our way of saying thank you very much, Wendy.
Well, what a beautiful gift. I so appreciate it because just the conversation alone was so enjoyable. So thank you very much, Kay.
Thank you very much. So everyone else, please follow Wendy on her social media platform and her pages. Follow Conflex Retirement Coaching Services. And remember their website. I'm going to leave it on the link in the description, and reach out to them as well. Just for that complimentary call, you never really know where it's going to go. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Take care now. Bye.